Chapter 14. Butcher. I was almost caught up on my reports when an older butcher dropped a stack of folders on the table in front of the couch. I exhaled slowly so I didn't stab him. What is this? CM sent it over. Stuff about the seals, he said. Thanks, Alfie. So helpful. I stood up and stretched before opening the first folder. Some of them were heavy, the kind of thing they kept old and delicate documents inside. I spent the night poring over those folders, only shutting my eyes for 2 hours and 15 minutes as Violetta had demanded so ruthlessly. Violetta shoved the folders aside and rushed out of the black box, upstairs and almost into malmorning. Everything going well? Good. We'll talk later. I broke into a run, throwing on my coat as I went. I desperately needed to see Violetta and taste her lips. She'd liked the cooking meat on sticks thing. So medieval. We were now officially together dating, and it felt like an enormous step in an impossible direction. I pulled up at Candlestick, but before I could go in the door, my father stepped out and put a hand on my chest, blocking my entrance. CM, what can I do for you? I asked, glancing around him like she might be somewhere hovering in the halls waiting for me to come to my office. I almost sighed and shuffled my feet, but I wasn't a child. When I was a child, I hadn't wanted to do that. Apparently it was catching up to me. Once we'd arrived in his office, I tried to beat him to the point. The seal can't be fixed. It has to be entirely resealed after the other 2 seals are removed. He raised an eyebrow and poured himself a glass of water, then mixed a powder into it. Landry's orders, of course. What did he need special powders for? Perhaps his health wasn't perfect. What is the powder for? He glanced at me, surprised. Had I ever asked him a question about himself that didn't involve Butcher's business? Probably not. I have no idea. I think that Landry likes to try things out on me randomly. This one is vile. Would you like some? I held up my hand and shook my head. Thanks, no. Ah, he already has you taking nasty substances to keep you healthy for your Violetta. I cleared my throat. He does. So the seals must be recast. They lost many butchers getting those seals on in the first place. He nodded soberly. We can do better than that. We can. He studied me. Of course. We have more advantages than ever before. Technology. He smiled slowly. Perhaps that, but mostly I was referring to your brother. Your butcher's boy and your baker. It's a remarkable little group, don't you? Agree. I frowned sternly. Violetta is not part of my fighting team. Of course she is, Orion. She's the key to the entire thing. You must have noticed by now that she's attuned to you, Armand, and Sebastian, and none else. That allows strength of connection that cannot be achieved with further dilution. Perhaps she should stop trying to connect with others. I cleared my throat. What about her defense? He shrugged. I don't believe you'd allow her to practice on our guest. No, I wouldn't. He smiled. Not that it's your place to allow or not allow your baker. Yet, you are her protector as you are the city's. What do you think about camping? I stared at him. In North City? I doubt I'd get much sleep. He laughed. But there was something tight, nervous maybe. Violetta suggested that we all go camping this summer, fishing, hiking, that sort of thing. I've always wanted to visit the Yukons. Violetta wants us to all go camping? I smiled at the thought of her sitting beside me in front of a fire, leaning against me for warmth. Yes, your mother, Landry, Sebastian, Armand, and her aunt and uncle. I took a step back. Mother? Absolutely not. He sighed. You intend to bring her into this family, isn't that correct? Of course, but Mother will not be pleased. That was an understatement. But she has to come to accept Violetta, otherwise Violetta will feel like an outsider like her mother did. We cannot make the same mistakes. It's fine to insist that Mother accept Violetta, a completely different thing. To make Violetta the target of her wrath when she fails to. He frowned at me and I frowned back until I forced myself to look apologetic. Instead, it's bad enough when Landry and Mother rub elbows. Let's see how this Christmas goes and then plan camping. He didn't agree with me, but he did go back to talking about the seals instead. Also, he had a new assignment. I need you to travel with that gray wolf, what's his name, east and west to talk with werewolves about the threat and make certain they know it wasn't under Butcher orders. Leave the city? I can't leave. I have school. And Violetta. I need to get ready for Midwinter's Eve when the next seal is, and find a forger for the seals. Mostly stay with Violetta. He raised an eyebrow. You're the butcher. Who else shall I send? I glared at him, forgetting that I was trying to be appropriately respectful. I don't care. Send Merlot or Casper. Send nobody. The threat is here in this city. Leaving now would be worse than careless. It would be completely idiotic. Werewolves aren't going to listen to me, not when they think that I'm what slaughtered entire villages. He raised an eyebrow. Your job is to make them listen. It isn't only werewolves I'd like you to see, but vampires as well. I would like you to take Voltaire with you. I ground my teeth. You want to send me into the sticks with a werewolf and a vampire to make them all listen to how innocent the first am? I would happily slaughter them all. I am not their protector but their butcher. If you can't see that, then you're completely delusional, old man. I'm not an ambassador, but a dagger. It's what you created, and now you expect me to be what? He stared at me calmly while I yelled at him. If you're finished being emotional, I have a list of the communities I'd like you to visit. I took the paper, crinkling from the pressure I put on it. What am I supposed to say? Invite them to the city for safety, and ask them to be cautious and prepare for attack if they choose to stay. That's all. I laughed and ran a hand through my hair. That's all. Great. This will take me a week. Probably. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe normally before I glared at him again. Why? Would you like me to explain the bigger picture? If you don't make alliances and smooth things over, we will be at war. That's what this monster wants, and he'll get it if we aren't very lucky and very diligent. Make alliances? Smooth things over? Since when do I do that? He laughed and shook his head. Since the last village. The one where everyone was already dead. The one where you found a survivor. He'll go with you. 2 werewolves, a vampire, anything else? A bogeyman, a couple wraiths maybe. Some zombies. He frowned at me. Don't tempt me. Orion, this is a serious matter and you will do it as well as possible. If I don't find that you're inspiring trust in our allies, I'll send Violetta along with you. I stared at him while my stomach turned into a solid rock. What? You'll protect her, and therefore make certain alliances are made and nurtured. My heart pounded and my chest felt tight from the effort not to hurl myself on my father and beat him senseless. That won't be necessary. No? It might be good for her. She didn't like being left behind the last time you went. If I go anywhere with Violetta, I wouldn't ever come back. He raised his eyebrows and we stood there. A serious standoff before someone knocked on the door. Enter, my dad ordered, his voice hard and unyielding like it usually was. After talking to me, I half turned and studied the paper, trying to focus on those towns, organize them in my head so I could cover them in the least amount of time. It was one of my father's older butchers, murmuring about a vampire outbreak in a small city to the west. Exactly what we needed. Orion, the CM said once the older butcher had left. You'll need to take a butcher to stand guard while you're resting. Not Sebastian. I nodded impassively. Olivia. He raised an eyebrow. Really? I suppose that makes sense. Very well. I'll inform her. If you like. May I be excused to go see my baker? She might want to prepare something for my trip. He hesitated, mouth tight. Of course. I'll give you 6 hours to prepare. I will prepare my requirements while Violetta bakes. He raised his eyebrows. Requirements. Travel arrangements. I don't wish to waste time. He nodded. My resources are at your disposal. I smiled. Perhaps I should know what your resources are. My father smiled back. Perhaps you should. Violetta was not happy. First she kissed me until I was dizzy with wanting and regular dizziness. Then she set to work pounding on dough, beating the poor stuff into shape while I organized transportation. Helicopters would not work for travel with a werewolf and a vampire. That was a pity. We could take a limo between small towns, and a train from the east sector through the city to the west. The butchers had a private car decades old with a nice secure dark compartment for that kind of guest. How long will you be gone, butcher? Violetta pounded particularly hard, jabbing the heel of her hand into the dough. Too long. A week probably. And are you allowed to call me? With a vampire and a werewolf watching? Of course. Olivia could watch the Monsters while I took a very short break. I'm sorry. She looked up with a tight smile. Why would you be sorry? I cupped her face in my hands and gazed into her beautiful eyes. I'm sorry that I won't see you. I'm sorry that I won't taste you. I'm so sorry. The word sorry seems next to meaningless. I'm sorry that you're upset. She sighed and slumped against me, forgetting about her dough. I held her heart fluttering against mine, fast like butterfly wings, so delicate and perfect. I don't mean to be upset. I'm just surprised and worried. You said you're going to warn werewolf villages? Will you be safe? Of course you will. You can fight 60 vampires, no problem. I kissed her forehead, brushed her soft eyelashes with my lips, then kissed her cheeks, her nose, finally her mouth. She tasted like honey, so sweet and rich. I held her and kissed her until I sank down on the bench helplessly. She raised an eyebrow and searched in my coat for the nasty concoction. When she poured it, I noticed that her hands were a little shaky. How am I going to live without you for a week? I'm so good at sucking the life out of you. And who will eat my burned biscuits? I suppose there's always Armand. I winced at the thought of Armand touching her taking his energy. If they had a connection, he might turn her if he wasn't careful, maybe even if he was. What about your brother? She stared at me, pale green eyes soft and vulnerable. I don't want to hurt him. I pulled her close for a moment, before I stepped away and pulled out my papers. Don't kiss him and he'll be fine. I tried to focus, but finally I pushed them away and simply watched her movements, strong, graceful, flowing from one task to another as she hummed under her breath, maybe Motown. I drank in the sight of her as though she were water and I was heading to a long desert. Landry had disappeared once I came in with the news, either to get away from her or from me, maybe to talk to the CM about it. What could I say to convince werewolves that butchers were above slaughtering them? We weren't. The only reason we didn't was that we had allied with them against darkness as long as they followed the mandate against harming innocents. I growled and Violetta looked up at me from the roll she was forming. You growled. Are you a werewolf? I walked over and put my hand on her waist, bending to gently nip the side of her neck. That must be it. She turned in my arms to stare at me, her eyes enormous and very serious. Orion, are you going to be in very great danger? If I couldn't handle it, the CM wouldn't send me. She frowned. He never makes mistakes? That was an excellent question. Was the CM making a mistake allowing me to be with her? Don't tell him that I said this, but the CM is trustworthy. He won't send me out if it's unlikely that I'll come back. Unlikely, but that's not good enough. You have to be perfectly safe. I laughed. Oh, Violetta, I would be in dire danger of death by boredom if I were perfectly safe. Don't worry about me. It's going to be a dull errand. Have to talk to people, warn them of the danger, and offer the city as refuge. Armand's going to love that. She stared at me, eyes bright, lips trembling. So you won't be fighting? I sighed. Probably not at all. I don't know how I'll survive. She buried her face in my chest. Thank you. I felt warm from the inside as I put my arms around her, holding her carefully, so I didn't squeeze her against me too tight. I almost said, I love you, but bit it back before the words were out. I felt it though. Love roared inside of me for this sweet creature who was getting flour and bits of dough all over my coat. I would happily die for her, kill for her, but this was something else. I had to be trustworthy, relatable, charismatic. I had to connect with monsters. For her I would not only deal with the devil but do. Chapter 15. Baker. Orion was gone for 3 days before I called Armand. Let me guess, you need a haircut. I'll meet you by the Greek's car in 1 hour. He hung up before I could tell him that he was completely wrong. It was 4 in the afternoon and Landry was grinding some zebra hooves in the pantry. He'd offered me the opportunity, but after a few minutes of doing it wrong, he took over and ordered me to go and do something fun. I needed to look into classes to start in January. Baking wasn't enough to keep my mind busy, well, not without Orion. I hurried along the path towards the pond of purity and jumped when Armand melted out of the shadows. How are you, Vanilla? He asked, lips curling in what might have been a smile. I tossed him a bag of muffins that he took but didn't immediately consume. That was strange. I'm suffering withdrawals. I need my butcher. He exhaled, eyed the contents of the bag before he threw 2 back and chomped on them. Do you want me to tell you about it? Hundreds of werewolves flooding The city because the butcher moves them with his tales of the evil monster who makes butchers look good. Housing is a nightmare. Most of them don't even know that humans are off limits. I'm having to arrange classes teachers to werewolves. He shook his head and bit savagely into a muffin. It wouldn't be so bad if their expectations weren't so high, but Orion's got them convinced that the city is some kind of utopia. It isn't. Bordertown is a complete mess. We don't have enough cages to keep the crazy werewolves, and the vampires are increasing their numbers almost as fast. Maybe we shouldn't go there if it's so crazy. He stared at me while he chewed and swallowed a dozen muffins. Nah, it'll be good. The Greek's getting cranky. He's mostly in charge of housing. He needs a night off to eat pizza. Cut your hair and remember that he's one of the good guys. I laughed and grabbed his hand. He yanked away violently, making me stumble. Pulled my hand to my chest and stared at him while he ate another dozen muffins. He was going through them like a starving person. I don't have a lot of energy right now for the taking. Sorry. Okay. I should have asked before I touched you. He nodded seriously. You should have. You're a baker. I am a baker. Witnessed by the plethora of baked goods you just annihilated. Aren't you eating? He frowned at me, holding the bag close like he was guarding it. Such a weird guy. Never mind, Armand. Eat the muffins. I won't touch you again. Are you sure? I'll be safe in Bordertown. He nodded but kept a wary eye on me. Yes. There are 2 werewolves in the cage. We'll keep the door shut. Just so you know in case you hear anything. I swallowed and hesitated a step. 2 werewolves in the cage? Great. We walked in silence the rest of the way to the car. My heart pounded as we got closer. You play violin? He asked randomly. Yes. I used to play. Oh. I stared at him. He didn't look like the violin type. He didn't look like the bath type either. We should play a duet sometime. He snorted and tossed a muffin in the air to catch it in his mouth hole. Some teeny bopper pop song about true love. Or a classic piece. I personally don't know any pop violin. You would have to teach me. He laughed and I smiled as I climbed in the car. The drive went by with his impeccable driving showing that somewhere beneath the crazy firecracker guy was a responsible adult. When we pulled up behind the Greeks, a few shifty-looking guys drifted away. Before I got out, walking closely behind Armand to the Greek's back door, he opened it and walked through the small back room, past the table piled in old pizza boxes and the cage where 2 ordinary enough-looking people sat, one a girl not much older than me, the other a guy closer to my dad's age. I smiled when the girl caught my eyes, but then she pulled her lips back in a snarl and I grabbed Armand's arm, pulling him between me and the wolf girl. Before we were finally in the shop, which was empty, I stared at the empty barber's chairs, the long mirror along the back, and outside where it was starting to get dark and nothing between me and that darkness besides a sheet of glass. Armand flopped into a chair and opened a newspaper. It was 2 weeks old. I perched on the counter but I didn't like my back to the window, and when I turned around I couldn't see the door that led into the back room. Armand, I don't think that this is a good idea. He flipped the paper. Get comfortable, Vanilla. You're going to be interested in this. I sat down in a chair next to him so that he was between me and both doors. Were you a very good butcher? I was a terrible butcher. Right, I know, but if suddenly 60 vampires came in through the windows, would you be able to fight them off? He folded the newspaper and turned to me, his eyes golden and amused. Of course not. I would, however, be able to butcher them. Fighting them off means leaving survivors. There's not much point in leaving an enemy to attack you. Another day, now, is there? I swallowed. I never thought about that. It seems a little bit brutal. He nodded and ate another muffin. I thought he'd finished them off, but it was a very large bag. Butchers are brutal. So are werewolves. And vampires? He nodded. It's a rather vicious world. On the other hand, there are muffins. He tossed another one back and settled into the newspaper. The front door banged open and the Greek came in, carrying a laptop tucked under his arm. I'd expected pizza. Violetta, I've got it. You have? Great. What have you got? It wasn't pizza. He sat down in the chair next to me and opened the laptop, perching it precariously on the arm of my chair. See? These numbers, are they familiar? I blinked at them. I think I've seen all numerals 0 to 9 several times. He nudged me with his enormous elbow. These are the same amounts shifted from you and your brother's accounts. I couldn't follow them, but I could search for them. See, isn't that brilliant? He nudged me again. If I do say so myself. It's been a long time since I've done this kind of thing. Sort of pleasant to see everything fall into place so nicely. Oh, I gripped his enormous arm. Are you saying that you know what happened to the money? You know who took it? He grinned at me, his face seeming to expand in that enormous bow. That's right. Well, not exactly, but I know what else they bought, and it's right here in the city. I stared at him. My money was used to buy something? What? A building down by the river, north, a warehouse by the looks of the address. Shall we go check it out? I hesitated. Is it safe? Armand and the Greek exchanged glances before the Greek gave me a sheepish smile. Sorry, I guess I didn't think about that. You probably shouldn't go. You wouldn't be safe here while we went, but you desperately need a haircut. He turned and tossed the laptop on another chair as if it weren't worth remembering, and came around and spritzed my hair, fluffing it up. You shouldn't let yourself go just because your sweetie's out of town. He's coming back, isn't that right, Armand? Armand had disappeared behind his newspaper, and I only heard a grunt of assent. He reminded me a lot of my dad. Can you tell what kind of warehouse it is, like what it's for? No idea, the Greek said airily, pulling out a pair of shears. I doubt it's going anywhere. Armand, do you think you could go check out back for the pizza? Armand folded the paper and got up, leaving me with the Greek. I exhaled and frowned at him. I thought he'd never leave. I love Armand, but he's driving me crazy. No, he's crazy and he's driving, which I'm sure is much worse. Greek, is there any sign of why my dad sent that money? He frowned at my hair, snipping. I have dates, amounts, and destination. But the why you have to draw from your own conclusions. How do you like being a baker? Has anyone bothered you, Orion being gone and all? I rolled my eyes. I haven't seen any other butchers since he's left. He nodded and smiled slightly. Good. Butchers are dangerous. I know. You told me. Top of the food chain. At the same time, he's just so sweet. He took me on a date and there was knife throwing and fires and roasting hot dogs and just everything so awkward and real. It wasn't perfect, which made it better than perfect. And when he kisses me, I think I'm going to die, or I already died and went to heaven. He sighed and snipped some more. And he eats your baking and feels the same way. You made Armand muffins. He's so weird. He acts like I'm going to suck the life out of him any time I touch him. He gave me a pointed look. And why would a sweet girl like you be touching a grouchy bear like Armand? I almost shrugged before I remembered not to move too much, instead sitting up straight. He's one of the few people I can connect with. He inhaled sharply. You mean like butcher-baker connection? You feel that with Armand? What? It's not like it is with Orion. First of all, his energy is all over the place, and while he has a solid base, it's covered in these explosive bursts. Can you get energy from those bursts? I shrug. Oops. I don't know. He doesn't want me to touch him, even though I made him an absolutely huge haul of muffins. What about the CM? He's supposed to feed all the baker's energy, isn't he? I sighed. The CM is okay, but it's still weird. He's Orion's dad, and when I touch Orion, I'm all tingly and glowy and it's amazing, but when I touch the CM, I really don't want to feel like that. When you touch Armand, głowy. I snickered. Oh yeah, no. It's like a drizzle with sporadic bursts of hail. I don't know. I haven't taken his energy and baked for him consistently enough to get a handle on it. Probably for the best. You don't want to see his ugly face any more than you absolutely have to. That's true. Not that I don't love Armand to pieces, it's just a little of him goes a long ways. I am grateful that he's trying to find my parents. Killer. Are you going with him to the warehouse? I put my hand on his arm and he froze, scissors midair while he studied me. I suppose I could. Please don't. Armand can go with some butchers and lots of weapons. I don't want you to get hurt. He exhaled long like a balloon was leaking. That is the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. In that case, I'll stay in and watch that new reality TV show. It's all about real-life hair trauma. The last episode, I haven't seen hair that big since the 80s. I gave him a big hug before I pulled away and sat up straight. Thanks. I've got the pizza. Armand said, carrying in 3 boxes, the top one open, and missing half its contents. How do you eat so fast? I asked. He raised an eyebrow. I fed the ravening wolves. You'd rather I threw you in. There, vanilla? How much pizza did you need to eat? I snatched the box out of his hands and took a piece, then handed the rest to the Greek. I will fight you to the death for my friends, just share. Armand grinned at me. A fight to the death, you say? The death of what? Your nice new sweater? Is that the sexy one? How about a fight to the death of your atrocious manners? Why don't you cut your hair? You're not a butcher anymore. You look like a lawn someone forgot to mow. You have no excuse because the Greek is the best hair stylist in the world. Armand ate 3 pieces of pizza from the next box, but his heart wasn't in. Probably because of all the muffins he'd already eaten. Vanilla, it's time for you to go home. The Greek's going to take you, but first you're going to take some of my... He couldn't quite say it, flinching on the last word. I sighed and walked over to him. If you don't like it, I won't do it. I'll give the CM a nice neck massage. His eyes glinted and he took my hands, pulling them up to his face while he stared at me as if daring me to pull away. Are you afraid? You do look a little bit like you might be infested, but no, there's nothing about you that a haircut and a container of bleach couldn't fix. And something about my manners, he muttered while I closed my eyes. I focused on his energy, trying to ignore the buzzing layers on top and dig deep beneath into the butcher's energy. At first it came slowly as usual, but after a few minutes it flowed into me rich and heavy like a wave that physically knocked me backwards, buzzing. The Greek caught me, his hands on my shoulders while he looked at me, concerned. Violetta, are you all right? I smiled at him brightly, a little too brightly, but that energy was coursing through my veins and I needed to bake something. I ducked around the Greek to go into the back room. There was a little stove back there and something Fidesque I could prepare for Armand. There was ramen, a bag of mostly rotten onions, and some ancient dried mushrooms and bottles of spices. I pulled a small packet out of my pocket and put a pot of water to boil. Meanwhile, I chopped onions and sautéed them, flipping them golden and perfect before I added the packet and spices, boiling the mushrooms and packet of nori. This was going to be weird. Like Armand smiled as I arranged the noodles and sauce in a bowl and carried it to the table, which had miraculously emptied itself of pizza boxes. Armand stood staring at me while he tapped his fingers against the wood, everything besides those fingers ominously still. I thumped down the bowl. Eat. It's probably the worst thing I will ever make. Hopefully it doesn't kill you. Greek, can you drive me back? I'm safe with him, right? You'd be safer in a nice cozy grave, the girl werewolf chimed in. I looked at her. That's one way of looking at things. Armand. He stared at me a long while before he licked his lips and glanced down at the bowl. Safe is a relative term. Yes, vanilla. Go with the Greek before some werewolf decides to find out how delicious you truly are. All right then. Greek, are you coming? He came through the door bringing a box of pizza with him. We'll eat the rest on the way. Have a nice evening, Armand, or a bad one, whichever makes you happiest. Not that he's ever happy, he whispered to me as he held open the outside door, gesturing me through. I only hesitated for a moment between the room with a glowering Armand, 2 crazy werewolves, and the outside where who knew what lurked before I ducked through and followed my enormous friend to the white hatchback that would take me home, back to Candlestick. Chapter 16. Butcher. I stood on a platform at the train station, my very last stop before I'd take the 3 a.m. train back to the city. Olivia stood beside me, arms crossed, looking for all the world like she always stood around on platforms surrounded by werewolves and vampires, the one endlessly moving, the other unnervingly silent and still. Welcome, children, Voltaire crooned, her voice as rich and decadent as vanilla pudding. Not really, but she told me it was, and I didn't argue since my whole purpose was to ride on the wave of her introduction. You've come here tonight to hear about the danger that awaits those who are unwary, and the salvation that comes from those who are prepared. May I present to you the butcher from the City of Saints. Howls and polite applause echoed through the dark night. I stepped forward, raising my hands to cut them off. They reacted immediately like they were my boys' choir, already attuned to me. I didn't need Voltaire, she simply made things much faster. Speed was of the essence. Just as well, werewolves didn't have the patience to sit around and listen to drawn-out speeches. Friends, brothers, I come to you with a dire message. A monstrous creature. Mimicking butchers in brutality, werewolves in cunning and vampires in subtlety is striking out, wiping out villages, breaking through our most cherished sanctums and infecting our own butchers. The vampires are next, the peace-loving creatures who seek only to live in the night free and unencumbered by the cares of the world. For safety I offer my city and ask only that you join our fight against the darkness and the monsters that gnaw on the very root of our existence. If you choose to stay and defend yourselves, know that if you call, butchers will come in defense of your lives, your freedom. I turn to gesture to Tom, the werewolf survivor from the village. Come forward. Tell them what happened. He came hunched over, face long, ears twitching. It killed everyone. My family, friends, it left nothing but blood, rivers of blood. It ate the bodies. Werewolf bodies. What kind of monster eats werewolves? A shudder went through the crowd. That was a question I'd had a lot of time to ponder. The boy turned to me and pointed. He found me with his brother, pack leader. In his city. I trust him. I smiled at him benevolently before I turned to the grizzled old wolf. Any words? He stepped forward, growling a bit until he had everyone's attention. He didn't like attention. He wanted to lurk in the shadows and rip out someone's throat. Didn't we all? This is a threat we all face. We're none of us friends, but if we don't work together, there won't be anyone to bury the corpses. Well said. I patted his back, something he'd almost gotten used to me touching him without a knife sliding into his skin. I was less accustomed to. The laws must be maintained in the city. If you choose to join us there, you'll have to sign a contract swearing to protect the innocent and cause no harm to humans, as well as keep the peace between all who live there, whether vampire, zombie, or other. These are the same laws you follow wherever you live. You who wish to live your life without any meddling are welcome to do so. I've taken enough of your time. My thanks. I bowed long low and, leaving the back of my neck unprotected, except for Olivia's protection of course. I straightened at the moment the train's light beamed brightly down the corner of the track, right on schedule. I stood there, looking reliable and relatable, until the train hissed to a stop, and I stepped into the butcher's car along with Voltaire, Greybeard, Tom, and Olivia. Voltaire at once glided to the box, built into the room with a few reinforced layers to it, where she would sleep in perfect darkness, while I was left in the main car with the werewolves and Olivia. I sat down on the couch and leafed through papers, eating a roll. The CM figured that I'd be bored without paperwork. How utterly thoughtful of him. Olivia sat next to me, frowning at her phone. Sebastian didn't text her often enough. She'd muttered complaints every hour for the entire 6.5 days I'd spent with her. He doesn't ever think about me, and when he does, it's not the same. He just doesn't feel like he used to. He's working with the CM in the city during the days of darkness. I'm sure he adores you. She pouted at me. I could tell she pouted even though I didn't look up from my papers. Violetta texts you a few times a day when she isn't busy, mostly to tell me to drink liquids and get enough sleep. Sebastian never worries if I'm taking care of myself. Sebastian is a butcher. A butcher's boy. I sighed and sat up to stare at her. Olivia, if you want a romantic, you should date a civilian. She pouted her poofy lips at me. You don't understand. Explain or stop talking. She lifted a hand to gesture at me. I expect that from you, but Sebastian is so sweet and sensitive sometimes, almost like before when I talked to him and he'd say things that made me feel like a woman instead of a bloodthirsty machine. Now he's so focused on becoming the perfect little butcher, I don't remember the last time he asked me something that wasn't about knives or fighting or how to clean off zombie guts. It's infuriating. The last few days, he hasn't said hardly anything at all. I sighed. All right. So sometimes he's unlike me, and that throws you off. When he is like me, Olivia, he doesn't know who he is any more than we do. He's growing into someone. You can hope that he's the same butcher you liked in the beginning, but if he's not, you have to accept who he becomes, or accept that he's not going to meet your expectations. She frowned at me thoughtfully. He's growing? That makes sense. I mean, we all change, and the first years as a butcher are very intense. The highs of your first good kill, the lows afterwards, trying not to eat your own arm off from the hunger. You're right. I need to be patient with him and see what happens. I can't get clingy and desperate. I should give him space and let him be himself without so much pressure. I scratched my chin and let my gaze drift back towards the papers. If that's what you've decided, I'm going to sleep for a few. Watch the wolves for me. She flopped over sideways and closed her eyes, fist curled around a knife handle. After a few minutes, I pulled a blanket over her and moved to a different couch across from her. Graybeard sat in a chair staring into space, an empty glass in his hand while Tom paced the length of the car, wearing a path in the emerald green rug. Thoughts? I asked Graybeard. He looked up with a start and shook his head and rubbed his hand on the back of his neck. Heard some rumors before the big rah-rah rally. Your brother found a new stash full of rebels and renegades by the river and ripped them apart with her lover, he said, nodding at Olivia who snored gently. I don't have reports on that. No. He shrugged. Maybe no one wants you to run back to your city and make sure your little cupcake's all safe and sound, not until you've finished with this little tour of torture. Why is my glass empty? He didn't get up. He only drank one glass after every rally. He was remarkably methodical for a werewolf. Maybe so. I pulled out my phone and called Sebastian. He answered it on the second ring. Orion, what's up? I hope I didn't wake you. I've heard reports of an attack by the river. Wanted to verify it with you. Oh, the CM didn't think you needed the details until you got back to the city. I'm on my way. We've just finished our last presentation. Oh, that's okay then. Yeah, Armand got some intel into the leader of the renegades and he totally went down to the river, and the butchers were called in. You should have seen him, Armand. He was insane. He was like you, only furry, and everyone followed him like he was their butcher. I mean, he's their pack leader, but I've never seen wolves so disciplined and cohesive. It was scary stuff. Disciplined werewolves? Sounds terrifying. How is your sister? Does she know about that? She's good. I had to give her energy last night. She sucked the life out of me until Landry gave me some stuff. Can't wait until you get back. She's worried about you. You're keeping in contact with her, right? She worries. Yes. Maybe I should do something else. Do you know what she'd like? Honestly, she just wants to see you. What time will you get in? 5 a.m. I have to check in with the CM first. Right. Maybe afterwards you can take a little nap in her bed. I smiled while he chuckled like he was an evil genius or something. About Olivia, how are things? He hesitated. Good. He had no idea. Good. We're going to have that group date this weekend. Yeah, that's good. I laughed. It'll be over and that's the main thing. Get some rest, Tansetta. I hung up and went back to my papers. My mind kept wandering to the attack, to my brother, to Violetta and the fact that she must be feeding him. Could Landry give him something to keep the edge off his hunger? As a werewolf he wasn't equipped to deal with that kind of thing. I frowned at my papers. I did not need to worry about Armin's hunger. He wasn't my responsibility. The only thing I cared about was whether or not he put my Violetta's life in danger. We finally arrived in the city while it was still dark. I woke Olivia and rapped on Voltaire's compartment, then opened the exterior door, watching the lit garages and shops pass by. When we stopped at a small platform, I hopped off, nodding to the older butchers who waited. They would take Voltaire back into custody and deliver the pile of papers to the necessary butchers while I was free to take my car back to Candlestick. I left the top down, glad for the cold in my face and hair, all sensation that screamed I would soon be with my Violetta again. She was waiting for me, wearing Landry's coat, standing on the steps, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. How long had she waited? I parked in front of her and got out, slamming the door closed before I walked to her, keeping my steps slow, steady so I didn't grab her and crush her into a hug. Before I could get to her, she threw herself into my arms, her hands in my hair, her cheek against my neck, my pulse pounding while I held her, kissing her hair and her forehead, her temple and her ears. She smelled like heaven and felt like home. You're cold. I carried her inside, her arms still wrapped around me. My energy slid into her slow and steady, filling me with a sense of complete peace and contentment. Also exhaustion. I had not slept much, and eating baked goods that weren't from Violetta didn't help. What I wanted was her goods and her sweetness. Orion, you can't carry me through Candlestick. What if someone sees us? Don't care. I muttered, pressing a kiss to her cheek. I needed more. I'm tired. Can I sleep with you? I kept carrying her, but I'd stopped breathing while she pulled away and stared at me, sliding her fingers through my hair as though she couldn't help herself. Like that one night? The horrible one. Without the near death. Hopefully. It's not night, it's morning. I sighed elaborately. That's true. I suppose it can't be like that night at all. How about like the morning? She smiled, slow, sweet, and delicious. If you'd like to rest in your bed for a few hours, I can't see anything wrong with that. I'll curl up beside you and protect you from vampires while you sleep. Someone has to do it. I sighed and put her down, resting my hands on her shoulders. It's a heavy weight, but I think you can manage it. I picked her back up this time, carrying her properly in my arms instead of just hugging her. I went at a near run, half afraid the CM would stop me. He should. I had reports to give. But I just didn't care. I needed Violetta, and I'd needed her from the moment I'd stepped on the train headed east. In my room, I went straight for my bed, put her down gently because she'd said it wasn't soft, and went back to the door, closing it but not locking it. I wanted to lock it, but I needed some supervision in case of nibbling on my love. She was so beautiful, curled up in Landry's coat, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes bright and gleaming. As I walked towards her, I took off my coat, folded it over the back of a chair, then sat on the bed and untied my boots. After that, I fell over beside her, my head on the pillow while I looked up at her. She smiled at me, took off her coat and tossed it over mine. She wore a little lacy camisole and flower-printed flannel pajama bottoms. She was far too sweet and lovely to be real. How sweet and lovely. How was your trip? She asked. Tedious, inane, but terribly important. How was your week? I heard about bunch of renegades Armand had the pleasure of slaughtering. She frowned as she studied me. You really are tired. Should I take your energy and go bake you something, or should I stay here staring at you while you sleep? I smiled. I love you. I'd meant to say either way, but apparently I was rendered honest by my exhaustion. She gasped and climbed under the blankets, snuggled against me and whispered, I love you, Butcher. I think that if you ever go off on a mission with Olivia again, I'll poison you. I opened my eyes wide. Really? Are you jealous? She sighed. Not really, but I had to help Sebastian compose a million texts to her. He really has absolutely no clue. I laughed and pulled her closer, her beneath the blanket, me above, which seems so senseless, really. That explains it. Olivia is deeply confused. That's probably the best thing he can do, keep her on her toes. We're still going on a double date. Do you want to do anything in particular? She snuggled closer to me. Do you have to be on top of the blanket? My arm will be cold if I'm trying to hold on to you. I moved, slipping under the blanket and pulling her back into my arms as quickly as possible. Better. She had her head on my shoulders, and she gazed up at me, pupils dilating. I need to kiss you, Orion. I need to kiss you until I forget that you ever went away. I had absolutely no objection to that. Chapter 17. Baker. I woke up a few hours later, Orion's arms around me, the world buzzing and beautiful, my heart so full I thought it would burst. He loved me. He'd said so, and he was in my bed or his bed, whatever, but with me. His shirt creases had left an imprint in my cheek. I didn't care. I snuggled against him, slipping my fingers through his hair and tangling my legs in his. He was so warm, strong, solid, but he smelled strange, like dogs and old blood. I leaned up on my elbows so I could stare at him sleeping. He looked so beautiful, strong cheekbones and jaw, soft mouth, dark hair against his light skin, so beautiful. I needed to kiss him. I tried to resist because kissing a sleeping person might be weird, but he said he loved me and he'd been gone so long. I leaned closer and kissed him. I'd meant to barely brush his lips, but the feel of him, the rush of steady, exquisite energy, I couldn't resist it. Pressed my lips to his, tasted him, delving deeper and deeper, knowing that he would wake. But he didn't. I'd been kissing him for a while before I pulled away and stared down at him. He shouldn't have been able to sleep through that. Orion. I poked his chest, lifted his hand and let it flop down, then squished his cheeks. Nothing. I froze while my heart pounded. Was he dead? Maybe he'd turned into a vampire. No, his chest rose and fell steadily. Maybe he was just tired, really, really tired. Or maybe I'd sucked the life out of him and now he was going to die. I scrambled out of the bed and backed away towards the door. Orion, I whispered. I'm going to talk to Landry and bake you something. If I could bring him back from almost dead with Jello, I could save him from whatever this was. Right? Maybe. Hopefully. I turned and ran, taking the steps down the tower 3 at a time. He had to be well. He had to be okay. He would be. He'd be perfectly fine. He was just tired and it was catching up to him. Ran into Landry on the other side of the kitchen door. He turned and grabbed my arm, keeping me from sprawling. Hello. Have you seen Orion? He's in my bed, but he's not moving. He's not dead. What's wrong with him? Is he dead? He glanced at the clock. He got here around 5, right? Now it's 9:15, so the likelihood of him being in a coma from you is pretty small. Were you kissing that entire time? I shook my head. We did kiss, I admitted. But it was only for an hour or something. He stared at me. An hour of kissing? I shrugged helplessly. Is he going to be okay? He nodded slowly. I'll look into it. I'm sure he'll be fine. Butchers collapse at times during the days of darkness when they've been under too much strain. Orion's been pushing hard. Why don't you bake him something and I'll take up some supplements? I hesitated, then nodded. He'd take care of Orion. At the same time, I was responsible for him. What supplements will you use? He turned me and pushed me towards the kitchen. I'll tell you later. Why don't you make some cream puffs? He loves those. He left me alone in the kitchen, the long room with dark beams, herbs, and freshly killed animals hanging over the counters and ovens. It was all terribly wrong. I felt like I was going to throw up. I had to see Orion. I had to taste him again. I had to hold him and stare at him and feel his heart pound beneath my hand. I needed him, all of him, forever. I shook my head and started towards the flour bin in the corner. Carried the entire thing to the table and worked on bread, muffins, cream puffs, and strudel at the same time, with chocolate pudding that I ate from the pan like I knew I wasn't supposed to do. I didn't care. Everything was a mess of not caring, because what I needed to do was go upstairs and wrap myself around Orion until everything was okay. After 45 minutes of haphazard baking, the kitchen door crashed open. Orion stalked towards me, his eyes dark and glittering. I reached for him, my hands in the silken strands of his hair, when he turned his head and sank his teeth into my forearm. For a moment there was a flash of pain, but then there was energy, so much energy and connection beneath the skin, his teeth, tongue, breath filling my veins with pure unadulterated life. I was flooded with so many sensations as every nerve in my body exploded in pleasure. My legs gave out as his teeth sank deeper, and I felt more of him than I'd thought possible. We both sank onto the floor and maybe would have stayed there floating on clouds of bliss forever if the alarm hadn't gone off. I blinked at him, his face blurry but still beautiful, attached to my arm like he was part of me. It beeped again, but I'd lost my ability to understand anything besides him. Someone ripped me away from him and knocked Orion back with the edge of a cast iron skillet. The agony of being away from Orion hurt so much more than the distant throbbing in my arm. My eyes wouldn't focus, but the beeping rang in my head on and on. Something was burning. Oh, cream puffs. I pulled myself to my feet, using the leg of the table until I could stumble to the oven. I burned myself taking them out, but it only hurt a little bit. Armand grabbed my arm, his touch painful, raw and harsh over my bite. He dragged me to the sink and ran cold water over my hand while I tried to stay on my feet. I looked over at Orion, where he sat on the floor glaring at Armand, his expression so hard and alien I didn't know him. Orion. He changed his gaze to me, and it was so dark, so heavy, so sweet and aching. I stepped towards him, or I tried to, but Armand pulled me back with a jerk, holding a knife at my throat. Feed him, Vanilla. Feed him, or I'll gobble you up myself. That didn't make any sense, but metal against my neck, Armand at my back, and Orion staring at me, and Armand like he was about to pounce at any moment, ripping the world apart to get to me, and maybe rip me on accident, made me pick up a knife and cut open the cream puffs. I spooned in chocolate pudding until the plate was ready. Armand slid it over the table towards Orion, who ate without taking his eyes off me. I watched him eat, aching for his lips on me, his teeth to bite into my skin, to feel him so deep and consuming. But after he'd had half the pan, his eyes changed, and instead of the raw mindless desire and destruction, shock, horror, and guilt echoed back at me. I bit you. He stumbled back a step, but he took the cream puffs with him. That made me smile. The cream puffs are terrible. The filling is generic. Chocolate pudding. He looked down at the cream puffs, ate another one with his eyes closed and shook his head. Nothing short of miraculous. He opened his eyes and gazed at me with so much tenderness my soul trembled. Nothing from your hands could possibly be anything less. He ate 2 more and then ran a shaky hand over his chin over red streaks. I looked down at my arm where Armand still had a grip. He still had a knife at my throat. Come to think of it, I shifted away from him. Can you put down the knife and let me clean out my cut, Armand? What are you doing here anyway? He growled low and my skin prickled while he sniffed me, my neck and bare shoulder around my camisole straps. It's not a cut, it's a bite. He dragged me back to the sink and let go of my arm, putting it under the water. He moved, quickly scrubbing out my wound before retrieving powders and bandages. He glanced up at Orion every now and then to make certain he kept his distance. Finally I was all bandaged and the bite still didn't hurt, not when Armand wasn't poking it. Tingled more than anything. Landry! Armand roared, the sound making me flinch and Orion scowl, but soon enough Landry came in, the CM behind him. Armand gestured at Orion. CMU. Can take him to your office for his report. Landry, you can take this cream puff before she faints on me. I half expected him to shove me in Landry's direction, but Armand stayed close to me until Orion showed signs of backing off. Landry came in, giving Orion a wide berth until Orion gave me an intense look. Violetta, I'll see you soon. I nodded and beamed at him. I'll be baking. We stared at each other, his eyes like magnets holding my gaze until the door closed, leaving me jarringly with Armand and Landry. I took a step away from Armand and my legs gave out. Armand grabbed my shoulders, not exactly the most comfortable position, as he dragged me to the ragged wingback chair. How badly did he bite her? Landry asked, looking from my mess of haphazard baking to my bandaged forearm. Meaty part of her arm, and she doesn't seem to be in any kind of pain. All the same, he bit hard through skin, muscle, possibly to the bone. I treated it with the usual powders. Landry nodded and then started rolling my bread dough into loaves. I tried to stand up to protest him messing with my baking, but I couldn't. I put a hand on my head because I was so dizzy and everything was still so achingly beautiful. Orion. I needed him. He's in trouble, Armand ground out. He's not allowed to bite the baker. Every good little butcher knows that. I shifted and pulled my legs up to curl in the chair. It didn't hurt. I don't want him to worry. He was worried that he'd hurt me, but it didn't hurt at all. Landry snorted and Armand looked disgusted, but I didn't care about them. Just wanted Orion. I sat in the chair, aching, buzzing, floating, and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, Orion sat across from me on the bench, carving a piece of wood into an intricate tree. I sighed happily because he looked up and was real, here, and so achingly beautiful. Had he really said he loved me? Seemed like a dream. We should talk, he said, his mouth in a firm line. About you biting me, or me putting you in a coma? His eyebrow twitched. Both either. That can't happen again. I agree. You were completely unresponsive. He frowned sternly. I wasn't in any real danger, but I hurt you. I looked down at the bandage, ran my fingers lightly over his bite, and he was right, it hurt. What do you think would have happened if Armand didn't come? Armand left. I hadn't even realized he was still in the kitchen, but he was stirring mushrooms and garlic on the stove. You'd bleed to death, but first you drain him to nothing but dust. You two made a very pretty picture. Passed out on the floor. We weren't passed out, I said, but I couldn't really remember. I touched my bandage again. Didn't hurt that time. Felt a little bit like Orion, like I was deeply connected to him. Orion, can you hold me? He swallowed and I could see the struggle on his face. Armand doesn't want to clean another bite wound. No, Armand doesn't, Armand agreed, slamming a plate onto the table. I made omelets. Vanilla, you need to eat before you faint again. He handed me the plate and I took it, frowning at it because there wasn't any way that Armand could make something actually appetizing, except apparently he made a mean omelet. I ate, smiling when Armand handed another plate to Orion, then took another and drew up a chair so we were all sitting there eating eggs and planning to take over the world. That can't happen again, Armand said before biting his lovely mushrooms. Really good. What do you think caused it? I asked, studying Orion. He looked perfectly healthy. He seemed well rested and his eyes shone beautifully. Whatever that had been didn't seem to have affected him negatively. You said that if you bit me, you'd be shocked and stop. Orion cleared his throat. Apparently I had no idea what I was talking about. I've never actually bitten a baker before. I smiled slightly. It's a good thing, otherwise I'd be jealous. Seriously. That can't happen again. I thought I killed you. How long were you asleep? How did Landry wake you up? Orion shook his head. He didn't. I woke up without you and came to find you. Landry went to consult with the CM instead of directly looking after Orion. Armand put in helpfully. The CM wasn't entirely happy about that. I think Landry might be in trouble. He sounded like that was shocking. Why wouldn't Landry take care of you, Orion? Orion frowned. It's actually probably a good thing I didn't feel like he was. Between me and you, I may have hurt him. Bit him. Orion smiled, slow and very sexy. No, Violetta. I swear that I will never bite another baker. Armand grunted. You're supposed to swear that you'll never bite her either. Can't believe that Landry was so negligent. Orion shrugged. I was fine. I think that bakers have to be with butchers for days for anything really tragic to happen. I swallowed down the last bite of egg that suddenly didn't want to stay down. You mean that bakers have actually killed butchers? Dead. Orion shrugged like it wasn't very interesting. Not often. It's all about balance, Armand put in helpfully. I stood up and for a moment had a head rush until things got less dizzy. Why? Am I so dizzy after taking so much energy? I should be strong and focused, ready to bake a mountain of muffins. Orion smiled, but he held onto his fork tightly instead of reaching for me. Wanted him to take me in his arms and carry me off somewhere or nowhere here. Was good, except Armand would probably hit him with a cast iron skillet. Again. Too much connection, Orion said, his smile growing. Too much energy at one time can make you sick. I have a lot of energy to do that to you. Armand punched his shoulder, hard so the sound of impact made a solid thudding noise. I reached out to touch his shoulder to rub it better, but Armand grabbed my wrist and pushed me back. The two of you are still completely unbalanced. Violetta, you should go for a walk. Yes, a long walk with me while Orion does something responsible like check on his boys. He took my plate, gave his and mine to Orion and dragged me past Orion, his hand still on my wrist. I brushed against Orion, and in that small contact so much of the feelings, the beautiful wonderful bliss swept through me that I didn't protest as Armand dragged me to the door, put Landry's coat on me and pushed me out wearing a pair of house slippers. I walked dizzy in the gloomy afternoon. I must have slept most of the day in the chair. After half an hour walking around the grounds of Candlestick, I shook my head and felt drops of water slide down the back of my neck. Took that long to realize it was raining. I stopped walking and whirled around to stare at Armand, my heart pounding. He stared back, face expressionless. Armand, did all of that really happen? He grunted and walked past me. I grabbed his arm, the fabric of his shirt damp but not cold. He was still warm in spite of the icy rain. If I could have killed Orion, why would Landry ever have allowed that? Why would the CM? Orion's so valuable to them. I know. I cured a couple of werewolves, but this risk seems really high compared to the benefits. Not that I didn't enjoy that whole thing, but I am not that kind of person, an escapist. I face my problems and deal with life. I don't do drugs or try and minimize the pain of existence in any other way. He laughed short, rough. No? You put on your brother's identity, and that's not an escape from yourself. You're an escapist just like everyone else. Your ways are just a little more elaborate and thorough than most. I scowled at him, my brother's scowl that maybe wasn't only his. I don't have to explain myself to you. I was doing it for my brother. He turned his head and looked at me, his eyes strange but beautiful beneath his tawny mane. I'm not judging you. I escaped this whole life and now I can't help but keep coming back to it. You want to lose yourself in the butcher the way he wants to drown in you. It's normal, love's a drug and all that good stuff. Denial never helped anyone. I'm not in denial. I don't want a love that completely eclipses everything else in my life. He only laughed. Whatever you say, Vanilla. Why do you keep calling me Vanilla? It's annoying. I'll have to call you Armed. No, that's not inane enough. Addled, yes, that would be perfect. He laughed again. You're welcome to call me anything you like, Baker. You seem to be getting your mind back. I'll leave you then. I grabbed his shirt. Wait. You can't leave me. He raised an eyebrow and cocked his head. He had a line across his cheek, red. Like a scar. What? Just getting warmed up with the insults? I'd stay it so. Amusing to hear you try to insult me, but I have things to do. He took my hand and yanked it off his shirt, shaking his head. Things to do, Vanilla. Can't babysit you and Orion all the time. He turned and loped off. I tried to keep up with him for a little while, but house slippers did not work on the slick grass, and he was fast, very, very fast, disappearing into the dark woods around Candlestick and leaving me panting. I turned back to the house, the gray slate roof of the manor visible. However far I wandered, I walked back slowly, shivering, afraid that when I got to the kitchen my brain would melt at the first sight of Orion and I'd fall into his arms and not come out until someone hit Orion with a skillet. Again. When I got to the kitchen's back door, the rain was coming down hard. Shivered as I opened the door, staring inside to find Landry stirring an enormous pot of stew, bread and rolls rising on shelves that weren't filled with already baked goods. It felt safe and right even without Orion sitting on a bench waiting for me. He's gone to Calder. How are you feeling? I took off the big wool coat and hung it on the hook, then kicked off the sodden slippers before walking over the cold stone floor to the wood stove, where the wingback chair waited. I sniffed. I think I walked around in the rain with Armand too long, but other than that I'm fine. I stared into the fire, pulling my knees up and leaning over them to stare at the flickering flames. Landry, why didn't anyone tell me this would be so dangerous for Orion, us being together? It doesn't make sense to put him at risk. He glanced at me with a tight smile. No? To tell you the truth, when Orion told me that he was kissing a baker, I wasn't too happy about it, but your connection is strong because of that emotional and physical bond, and both of you are here where we can watch to make sure nothing too dire happens. Life is dangerous for butchers, Violetta. He shrugged. Life's dangerous for everyone, come to think of it. Death's coming for everyone. That's comforting. He stopped stirring his stew and went to the cupboard on the side of the enormous sink where he kept the tablets for Orion. He took out a bottle I remembered and I stuck out my tongue for the drops without him telling me. Made a face at the terrible taste, but then Landry handed me an apple popover. You're going to have to teach me how to make these, I said after I'd eaten half of it. So delicious. You haven't taught me very much since I've been here. He raised an eyebrow. Is that a complaint, Miss Tansetta? You're finessing your instincts. I haven't been finessing anything. The last batch I made was terrible. He laughed. There was more potency in one batch of those terrible loaves than a dozen of your ordinary kind. As for your cream puffs, it's a mystery since Orion consumed them all, but how well he's recovered without the slightest negative affects are a compliment to your baking. Maybe you don't have proper technique down quite yet, but you definitely aren't terrible. You're going to have to rest and recover before you do any more baking. Why don't you go see the CM? Orion will come in the morning. I sighed and got up, still feeling completely off. At least my brain belonged to me. That was something. I rubbed my arm absently. It didn't hurt but sent a wave of tingling happiness through me. I jerked my hand away like I'd been stung. I did not need tingling happiness. I headed to the CM's office, still in my pajamas, shuffling along like an old man. Or an old woman. Whatever. A butcher was leaning against the wall outside the CM's office. I stared at him. He winked back. It was Casper, the young butcher who liked to flirt with me. Hello, Miss Baker, he said with an eyebrow wiggle like there was something suggestive about that. Butcher. Is the CM busy? He shrugged. Isn't he always? Are you waiting for him? He shrugged again, but his smile was wild and dangerous. Why, did you have an idea of how I could pass the time? I scowled at him. Enough of this nice guy business. I stepped up, rapped quickly on the door and then backed away, but the door opened immediately and Sebastian, my brother, came out, his massive frame still too big for me to believe. He was bigger than Orion. How did that happen? Hey Vi, what's going on? Are you in your pajamas? Are you sick or something? He stepped forward and put his hand on my forehead. I brushed it away and stepped around him. CM, do you have a minute? If Casper needed to talk to you first. Casper gestured me ahead of him. Ladies first. Sebastian scowled at him. Who are you calling a lady? I rolled my eyes and headed past my idiot brother and into the CM's office, where I slumped into a chair without waiting for him to offer it to me. He closed the door and sat in the chair next to me instead of behind the enormous oak desk. Can I get you some chocolate? I perked up slightly. Yes, I'd like that. I mean, Orion usually gets me chocolate, but I'm not sure. I slumped back down. He laughed, low and gentle, while he got up and put on a pot of coffee, except it was chocolate instead of coffee. The scent quickly filled the room and I relaxed slightly just smelling that delicious steam. How are you feeling? The Sim asked, sitting down in the brown leather chair beside me again. Tired, achy, like I'm getting over the flu, or maybe about to have one, I don't know. I was walking around in the rain for a long time while my brain came back. Have you ever been a baker? I mean, do you know anyone who's dated butcher bakers, and how did it work? Doesn't seem like it can work. I mean, if I don't put him in a coma, he'll make me bleed to death. How can a relationship between us work? It can't, but what else can I do? I have a baking compulsion. I get up in the middle of the night unable to sleep until I bake something. If I left, I'd still bake, but I wouldn't have any butcher to draw the strength out of, and then I'd feel like this only 50 times worse. And all the time. He nodded as he listened intently. You could quit baking. If you could restrain yourself from all baking for a few years, the compulsion would fade. In time. I stared at him. Resist the compulsion for years? I can't resist it for 2 days. He laughed. I suppose you had better find balance with your butcher then. Balance, what does that mean? How can there be balance when I completely lost my mind with Orion? Completely. I wouldn't have cared if he bit my nose off. Seriously, I've never felt like that before. I knew a butcher who married a baker. She took good care of him. All the same, he had bite scars all up and down his arms. He didn't seem to mind. I winced. No, I don't suppose he did. So a male baker married a female butcher, and they lived happily ever after minus a few comas and bite scars. They're still doing well. She's out west in the LA district. Their bond isn't as strong as yours and Orion's. By that I mean his baking wasn't ever as potently charged as yours, and of course Orion's the butcher, so his energy is more powerful than Sandy's. He shrugged. The two of you seem to be doing well. I would have expected Orion to attack Armand for touching you while he was mindless, but he had sense enough to allow Armand to stop the bleeding. Yeah, but I think that had something to do with the knife at my throat. He laughed, a beautiful sound, before he leaned forward, his eyes bright. Really? Armand held you hostage? Clever. We're lucky he was waiting around to hear how many wolves were headed our way, and heard your baking alarm instead. I licked my lips. I guess. He put a hand on my shoulder, my bare skin that Armand had sniffed so weirdly. Do you want to practice taking my energy? You'll have to practice not taking Orion's. You'll get to the point where you'll be able to have control over those instincts while you sleep. That could come in handy one of these days. I frowned at him before I gingerly put my hand over his and let his energy sink into me. I didn't want his energy, not when I'd had so much perfect, exquisite Orion, but this wasn't about what I wanted. Whatever Armand thought. I did not run away when things got hard. I fought and I didn't give up. After a half hour trying to take his energy, I felt stronger but more irritable. The chocolate helped with the irritability. It wasn't the CM's fault that he wasn't Orion. Not that knowing that helped. I didn't know anything. It still didn't make sense that no one would even try to stop us from being together. CM, what happened at the warehouse by the docks? He raised his eyebrow. Did you know about that? We found several renegades. Your brother's friend, Anthony, one of them. Your brother insisted that he had quit fighting our cause, but apparently not. Where is he? I asked, standing up. He smiled slightly. He's being held, questioned, waiting his trial. Trial? His smile tightened. His position is very serious. His whole family could possibly become outcasts while he is executed, imprisoned, or exiled. I inhaled sharply. Anthony? He was the first one who ever gave me energy. Not a lot, and he teased me, but he was a friend. Why would he choose the rebels over Orion? Why would he ever choose a side that was fighting against Everything he was? It made no sense. Why? Why did my dad pay money so? The rebels could buy the warehouse? Why did they get killed? Why didn't Orion warn me that I could accidentally suck the life out of him? I swallowed and forced a smile. I understand. I'm going to visit my aunt and uncle this evening. He stood and nodded. Excellent. The Vespettis are wonderful people. May I drive you? I stared at him. I wouldn't want to bother you. I was going to call a cab. He laughed and shook his head. I don't think anyone would be happy with that idea. It's no bother, I assure you. I've been meaning to visit the Vespettis for some time. Why don't you get dressed and I'll tie up a few loose ends then? Meet you in the garage. I nodded because my head was running around in circles that didn't make sense. I needed to find out everything I could about my dad, the butchers, and I wasn't going to do that by baking Orion cream puffs.